All right, let's jump right in. We're going to travel back to the 19th century to unpack a really powerful and, surprisingly relevant idea from the cultural critic Matthew Arnold. This guy was living through a world in massive transition, and his take on it, well, it's incredibly sharp. I mean, Arnold saw the future with just stunning clarity. He said the growing power in Europe is democracy. And for him, this wasn't just, a political choice. No, it was like a force of nature, an unstoppable wave that was fundamentally changing everything. It was coming, and there was absolutely nothing anyone could do to hold it back. But here's where it gets interesting. He also posed this really challenging question, and it gets right to the heart of his whole argument. As this new world rises, what gets lost? What essential qualities, what kind of national spirit might just fade away in the process? So, to really get what Arnold was worried about, we've got to look at what was on its way out: England's fading aristocracy. For him, it wasn't just about rich people losing power, it was about losing what he called a world in the grand style. Okay, so when Arnold talked about the aristocracy, he wasn't just talking about money and titles. Not at all. He saw them as the keepers of the nation's cultural tone, what he famously called the grand style. This combination of high spirit, dignity, and an exquisite culture. On the other hand, you have democracy, with all its energy, its drive for equality, its openness, two very different sets of virtues. And for Arnold, this wasn't just some nice little extra. He believed they set an invaluable example. It was like they held up this ideal of dignity and high-mindedness that, in his view, the whole nation could look up to. He thought that their very existence kind of elevated the national character. But here's the crucial part. Arnold wasn't living in the past. He saw crystal clear that this era was nearly over. The people, the masses, they just weren't buying it anymore. They weren't willing to just accept that the aristocracy had some divine right to lead. The whole foundation was crumbling. So as that old world faded, something new was rising to take its place: the unstoppable force of democracy. And Arnold had this really fantastic phrase for what was driving it all: to affirm one's own essence. So what does that actually mean, to affirm one's own essence? Well, for Arnold, democracy wasn't some political textbook idea. It was a gut-level human drive. It's that desire in every single one of us to develop our lives fully and freely. To have, as he put it, ample light and air. To not be cramped or overshadowed by anyone else. And this is so key to understanding his point. He said, this whole movement is just like any other operation of nature. You can't praise it, you can't blame it just is. You can't stop it any more than you can stop the tide. It's simply human nature working itself out on a huge scale. Okay, but here's where Arnold really pivots. You've got all this raw, unstoppable energy, this drive for freedom. But is it enough? Is that all a nation needs to be truly great? Arnold's answer was a pretty emphatic no. This is where his big fear comes in. He worried that without that high ideal that the aristocracy, for all their flaws, had provided, England was headed for a new kind of poverty. Not a poverty of money, but a poverty of spirit, of culture. He called it the danger of Americanization. And what did he mean by Americanized? Well, for him, it was this fear of a society where the masses are in power, but they don't have an adequate ideal to elevate them. A nation that's prosperous, sure, and free, absolutely, but one that lacks a high culture, a unifying spirit. Basically, a collection of successful individuals without a collective soul. So he looks around at the new ruling class, the middle class, and he sees this big dilemma. Yeah, they've got energy, they believe in liberty, they believe in industry, all good stuff. But he says they're lacking something crucial. They don't have that fine culture, that high reason needed to set the tone for the whole country. Okay, so if the aristocracy is fading out and the new middle class isn't really up to the task, what do? Who's going to fill this huge cultural void? Well, Arnold had an answer, and believe me, for his time, it was pretty radical. His solution? The state. Yep, his answer was the state. He argued that the nation as a whole had to find a new way to act together, to lift itself up. Now, hold on. Before your mind jumps to big government and bureaucracy, it is absolutely essential we understand what he meant by the state. He wasn't talking about some outside power controlling people. He was actually quoting another thinker, Edmund Burke, who said the state is, quote, the nation in its collective and corporate character. So let's break this down. For Arnold, the state is the nation's best self in action. It's a source of high reason, a rallying point for the best ideas. It's how you get things like great public education systems that benefit everyone. What it is not is some despotic power or an enemy of liberty. It's the people acting together at their absolute best. So when you put it all together, what you have is Arnold writing over 150 years ago, posing this timeless question for our time: who guards the nation's soul? He saw a nation caught between worlds. You've got the aristocracy with their grand style and dignity, but they're totally out of touch. Then you have the middle class, full of energy and a love for liberty, but maybe a little narrow-minded, lacking that high culture. And then there's democracy itself, open, equal, powerful, but in desperate need of a high ideal to guide it. It's like a puzzle with a huge, dangerous piece missing right in the middle. And that was Arnold's big challenge. He wanted people to see the state not as an enemy of their freedom, but as the best tool they had for their own collective elevation, to use that collective power to build a new kind of grand style, one that was fit for a modern democratic age. And that leaves us with a question that feels just as urgent today as it did back then. In a democracy where everyone is busy affirming their own essence, living their own free lives, who is responsible for the nation's soul? Who or what is supposed to be looking after its shared culture and its highest ideals?